so much.
Thank you. If I had bothered to rename my talk, it might be how do yoga and Ayurveda get connected in the 20th century? It still relates to longevity practices and public health, but that might be a more accurate title. So today it's kind of truistic that yoga and Ayurveda are complementary aids towards promoting health and longevity. For example, Swami Ramdev couples a successful television program with an extensive line of Ayurvedic and other Swadeshi products, which aim to heal both the individual and nation under the label of Patanjali. Contemporary degrees in Ayurveda commonly contain units in yoga philosophy and how asana and pranayama might benefit particular conditions. With the election of the BJP to a majority in the Indian Parliament in 2014, the departments of AYUSH, Ayurveda, Yoga, Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, and Homeopathy was raised to the level of an independent ministry. And since the new millennium, AYUSH has additionally covered the Rigpa industry or Amchi system as part of AYUSH, which in the most recent publication says it's based on Ayurveda, although attributed to the Buddha. I'm sure people would argue with that. But yoga was clearly not seen as part of Ayurveda in the first half of the 20th century. At the turn of the last century, the healthcare landscape in India in some ways was conceptualized very differently. And so this paper is going to highlight aspects of continuity and difference in kind of snapshots of yoga, Ayurveda, and public health reports across the 20th century. I'm going to argue that these two disciplines became seen as sister sciences through a kind of pragmatic logic of public health imperatives to promote longevity and alleviate suffering at the level of epidemiology and public health. Well, I want to convince you of the logic of a gradual top-down association and how that developed. I also want to really underscore the diversity of approaches to health and healing on the individual level within India. And in many ways, yoga has always been part of the health and healing landscape. So our first snapshot comes from the Usman Report, which was commissioned in 1921 and named after the chairman of the report. It sought to examine the value of Indigenous medicine and to explore its practices and tenets. Although it was a regionally commissioned report, there were over 180 written submissions and over 40 oral reports which were transcribed. And these reports came from all over India in a variety of regional languages, some of which are still being translated by my colleague Christelle. Well, she's commissioning their translation, which is very helpful. The way these questions were framed in the reports is very interesting because it's clear that there was not a good understanding of what Indigenous medicine was by the people who were commissioning the reports. But there was also a clarity that Indigenous medicine was very widespread and perhaps there was an unjustified prejudice against it at the level of government civil servants. So some of the questions that were asked include, what are the theories of causation of disease according to your system? Please favor the committee with your views as to how far your theories stand the tests of modern scientific criticism. And what are the principles and methods of diagnosis and treatment followed in your system? And so they approached well-known practitioners of Unani and Ayurveda and Siddha to the exclusion of any other systems for this report. And another question was, what are the causes of decay in the Indigenous systems of medicine? And kindly favor the committee with your suggestions for a revival. So these weren't at all leading questions. And it's also important to note that the Usman Report does not reflect the kind of more vernacular practices of what might be done at home or by individuals who are not qualified in some sense of the word, at least a popularly accepted medical practitioner of one of these identified systems at that time. But already quite a lot of the issues about the relationship between Indigenous medicine and biomedicine that are tropes throughout the 20th century are already apparent in 1923. So there's an idea that Indigenous medicines were distinctly able to promote wellness and longevity, and there was also an assumption that biomedical practitioners might refer their patients to the traditional medicine for chronic diseases or things which there weren't a kind of ready, immediate cure in modern biomedicine. And there's already a concern about the practice of mining Indigenous medical knowledge for specific ingredients by biomedical practitioners. And in the Usman Report, there's a particular fear that this kind of borrowing without understanding the context might amount to quackery on the part of biomedical doctors, and that's how they described it. The Usman Report shows very scant evidence of yoga being a very common in the understanding of indigenous medical systems at this time. However, there are a few exceptions. One practitioner from the UP mentions aspects of yoga as a treatment modality alongside a number of other experimental therapies which might have to do with Ayurveda, including fasting, chromopathy, or the influence of the sun's rays on healing, Kampmanti's electrical healing, which was quite popular in some circles as an experimental therapy at the time. And so this physician, who's obviously on the edge of scientific possibilities, was also exploring that respiratory exercises or pranayama or physical exercises based on the Hatha Yoga asana could also be used for medical interventions. And then we're still getting the Siddha reports translated from the Tamil, but yoga seems to be obviously much more an integrated word if it's not clear exactly how the treatment modality works. So this is from a list of medicines in increasing potency in the Siddha system from one of the Siddha doctors. Great medicinal leaves, strong salts, distilled water, scented substances, stones, metals, good feature of native arsenic, mercury pills, yoga, each one stronger than the last to cure diseases. Which is interesting, to say the least. So, other scholars, such as David Arnold, have noted that although perhaps not held in the highest prestige in comparison to biomedicine, the majority of medical practitioners in India were traditionally trained indigenous healers of some persuasion. So one of the Tamil Nadu practitioners identifies, well, these are some other things that he's saying are sporadically found in Siddha texts, which are not systematized in the same way that Ayurvedic texts are. So, but the point I wanted to make was that in this district he was representing in Tamil Nadu, there are about 23,000 head villages, about 20,000 Tamil and Dravidiya practitioners, and about 600 to 700 English or biomedically trained practitioners for this area. So this practitioner concludes, we cannot say that Tamil medicine is in a perishable state, but there's no institutions in the Western sense which turn out graduates at this point. So that's the main recommendation for a revival of indigenous medicine, one of the main ones that comes out of this report. The Usman Report also gives a strong impression that the indigenous methods are efficacious in alleviating the suffering of the Indian population and in being economically and practically efficient in reaching that population. And another thing that stands out both in this report and the next one I'm going to talk about is there's a really strong belief that science and truth are ultimately one, and that there's some way to intellectually bring together both biomedical traditions and various indigenous medical traditions. At the same time, there's always a strong number of dissenting voices which express skepticism as to the extent to which the two systems are fundamentally compatible. So it kind of goes back and forth in the reports, but the ones commissioned to write it are generally of the opinion that truth is one and will prevail. And just quickly, before we go on to the next snapshot, we know that there was much more diversity in approaches to health and healing involving yoga and longevity than were captured in this Usman testimony. For example, we've got the lineage of kind of yogic cure ashrams, which inspired both Nanda and Sri Yogendra to establish yogic therapy in Maharashtra. We've got the Kayakalpa treatment that Tapsi Baba was highly publicized for doing in 1933 to Pandit Bharavia. And we've also got Gandhi increasingly, this is, I forgot this was in there, this is newspaper, 1938 newspaper adverts for a variety of health and longevity products in one of the Indian papers, which is in a different set of notes. And so you've got Gandhi promoting yoga and naturopathy, an affordable and accessible means of improving health for rural Indians. And he was very critical of both the elitist Ayurvedic and biomedically trained practitioners as shortchanging the rural masses of India. And now for our second snapshot, which is the Chopra Report of 1947. So this report was commissioned on the eve of Indian independence, and in contrast to the Usman Report, it was much more open in its consideration and its reporting on what was considered indigenous medicine. Commissioners traveled around the country interviewing and viewing demonstrations which were only partially transcribed in the final report. And so this report demonstrates a much larger diversity of what was being promoted as various healing modalities, yoga, physical culture, other cures, some of which have long continuities of practice, while others are more innovative. And something that comes out by this time, in contrast to 23, is there's a much stronger belief that Indian systems must be judged in terms of biomedical efficacy, and not vice versa. So the standard of biomedical cures is much more commonplace by 1948 when it was finally published. So just to give you a taste of some of the more interesting interviews that were part of this report. Bangalore was a particularly interesting place for a variety of treatment methods, and so they actually interviewed KP Iyer in his physical culture school as part of this report. He's asked, do you treat patients? Yes, for some diseases. How many beds do you have? I have accommodation for 12 patients. What diseases do you treat? I treat asthma, bronchitis, diabetes, gastrointestinal disturbances, joint affections, mental disorders, and nervous disorders, as well as paralysis. Do you keep any records? Obviously not everyone keeps records. Yes, we keep records of weight and measurements of the body of our patients, so this is obviously a bodybuilding institution. And are you in favor of employing modern scientific methods of diagnosis and treatment? Yes, of course we employ them. Yes, we're in favor of research. The next witness was a Dr. Lakshmi Pathi, and the aims and objects of his institution are seva, or service, through Ayurvedic physicians who not only follow the classical systems of Sharaka Shustra, but also receive their training through the Guru Pramana, particularly methods of treatment by yoga, mantra, and yantra. So how are you using the process of yoga in your treatment? Yes, we are. By employing dhyana yoga, we treat certain patients suffering from insomnia, anger, excitement, etc. Our observations are that patients are greatly benefited by this treatment. However, there's no, I suppose it's some kind of meditation, but there's no kind of elaboration on what that is. We use mantra yoga in the treatment of sprains and scorpion stings. In scorpion stings, a 50% cure might be expected for mantras. In certain cases, though, the sting breaks inside, and until it's removed, the pain cannot be alleviated. Can these techniques be taught to others, or can you alone practice them? And the reply to this is it can be taught to others, but it can only be to persons who are suitable and on especially auspicious days, and they should stand in water and perform japa as part of their initiation. With the application of yantra or talisman therapies, this is particularly good for children who are disturbed in sleep, convulsions, or children who have epilepsy, and the percentage cures here is about 35%, although it doesn't work in adults. These methods are not superstitious, we can prove them. However, it's interesting that the 35% efficacy rate is good enough in this context. And then Krishnamacharya, who many are familiar with, has also given a demonstration of yoga asanas for the committee and discusses his yogic methods of treatment. In his testimony, he's asked, did you invent these methods? And he says, no, it's Patanjali, which I think also shows a certain novelty to this method of a treatment. But one of the most interesting testimonies in the 1948 report, or the more revealing ones, is an epidemiologist, Dr. Lal from Calcutta, who's a professor of epidemiology. And he very astutely points out, so in his Singer district, there's a population of about 69,000 in 1945. There's 13 registrable practitioners of Western medicine in this area, including 4 employed in pharmaceutical industries, or as dispensing. He only knows of 1 Ayurvedic Vaidya in this area, 16 homeopathic physicians, and 31 quacks. And then he says, which I find the most interesting bit, this works out to 1 doctor per 1,000 of the population, including all the quacks in the doctor ratio. So the point here is that all these practitioners and treatment modalities are really part of the healthcare landscape and an integral part of public health provision in terms of relief of suffering, if nothing else. So quickly, how does this work and why is it rational? So this is an idea that's been pointed out by a number of people that I can't claim any originality to, including Dominic Majestic, Joe Marche, and particularly Daniel Moorman. So I think what's going on here is the meaning response, as Moorman discusses, that the beliefs and contexts an individual has about a medical intervention measurably contribute to its effectiveness, particularly concerning aspects of pain relief. And this psychological effectiveness, combined with the body's tendency to return to a state of homeostasis, and many illnesses being self-limiting, as well as being effectively addressed by the immune system, means that the placebo and this kind of meaning effect are really underutilized in most of the economic and political contexts of first world nations. So there's often the placebo effect is more than 50%, and the amount spent on medical interventions does not perhaps warrant their effectiveness. So in pointing this out, I don't want to imply that various Rasayanas or Ayurvedic Rasayanas or other traditional formulations do not have active ingredients which are effective. But if you're someone whose child is suffering from insomnia, the chance of a 35% cure from a talisman might be a chance well worth taking. So in the contemporary context, one can look at the popularity of something like Katarina's Bangalore-based laughter yoga, which is also incorporated in some of the Ramdev yoga sessions I've attended in Britain, which in the Ramdev session I also included the ancient Indian science of reflexology, overall positivity, and the importance of regular biomedical checkups, as well as health and safety warnings for contraindicating conditions and blanket statements of mudras being able to cure almost anything. So what you see is a really eclectic, anything that helps is okay approach. It's not very dogmatic. So very quickly, you can see, that's the laughter yoga and some of the Ramdev promotional materials. So very quickly, I'm not going to go through this slide, but you can see a increasing institutionalization of AYUSH really from the 1970s onwards. The kind of government funding on a national level starts picking up the pace from this point. And there's always been kind of a variety of regional variations, and you can find lists of hospitals and state government supports in various regions before this point. In 1977, we started getting postgraduate study. In 1988, we got the first nationally recognized Swami Vivekananda Yoga University in Karnataka. So you've got an increasingly formalized system of registering AYUSH practitioners and now defining yoga syllabuses and integrating that as part of the medical system. The most recent AYUSH reports are quite interesting in a different way. They don't have any interviews or primary research, but they cut and paste definitions of yoga as union from year to year, and mostly do economic and export imperatives of how much money is this industry generating, how many exports can we get out of it. And although there's increasing efforts at registrations and defining curriculum, I'm not overly concerned that any standardization will actually be achieved. At the same time that AYUSH promotes this regulation, the Department of Health, in a separate website, lists 16 different yoga institutes which have a very diverse approach to training and healing modalities. So I see the demand-led side of the medical economy as perhaps determining the future contours of medical treatment at least as much, if not more so, than any attempts at legal and political regulation. So in conclusion, there has been an increasing association at the level of policy making towards a formal promotion of yoga and Ayurveda as tools for promoting public health and individual longevity and the accompanying economic investment in these modalities. But also during the first half of the 20th century, there's a sense of creativity, of seeking information, of a variety of possible avenues, including exploring or dealing with traditional medical practitioners. That was in the 1948 report. But the accumulative forces of centralization, although they provide a standardized narrative about the nature of yoga and Ayurveda, it can mask the continuing and ever-present diversity of practices and understandings. And I also want to emphasize this is not just India, but throughout the world, the pragmatics of possible cures and available solutions keep a diversity of approaches viable. And this is always creating new permutations and inventions and innovations in the healthcare landscape, as well as continuing some kind of continuity of a variety of traditional practices. That's it.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much for your paper. I was curious about the rogue slide in the newspapers and the construction of quackery. I know in the American context, the American Medical Association and the newspapers were really involved in producing kind of like these columns where they would analyze quackery and warn people against it. And I was wondering, in your research, if you came up with the role of newspapers in constructing quackery between the first report in 23 and the report in 48. How does that category change? Do they ever talk about Ayurveda and yoga as quackery? Does it go in and out of the quackery? How does that work?
That would be a really good research project. And unfortunately, the Indian newspapers have not been digitalized like the American ones have. So this was actually photographs from microfilm still. So if you want to go through the microfilm, be my guest. But maybe in the next 10 or 20 years that'll be answered, yeah.
Suzanne, when the Usman Report was done, was it common for Ayurveda and yoga to be combined at that time? And have you come across any references in any of these reports to yoga and Ayurveda being sister sciences?
I think that the Usman Report really, there's only a few mentions of yoga at all. And I mentioned most of the ones I found. So there's no, I don't think they're really being used together. There are a few physicians who are more intellectually creative and experimental. I've never seen the phrase sister sciences. And the only place I think they come together is some parts of the Sherpa report. There's I'm not sure if it's one or if it's two physicians who are really talking about psychology and yoga and Ayurveda as perhaps having a kind of psychological application for psychosomatic illnesses that are sister. So kind of illnesses from wrong views and wrong conceptions of the world. And in this way, they might be sister sciences. But that doesn't really get taken up by anyone except maybe the odd individual practitioner.
Hi. Yeah, I'm interested why you decided to stop at 2005 and 2007. I understand most of the focus of your talk was the earlier reports, but some really interesting things have happened since then, particularly with Ayurveda in public health, notably the National Rural Health Mission, which is the biggest single expansion of public funding for Ayurveda in its history. So, it's interesting to think about how the trajectory of yoga and Ayurveda has very much differed since the inauguration of the National Rural Health Mission in 2005. I wonder if you had anything to say about it.
Just that I've been mostly concentrating on the earlier periods.
Okay. Fair enough. But I mean,
yeah, no, it's very interesting. Yeah.
There's this huge, I mean, an enormous expansion of public funding, public health-oriented Ayurveda since 2005, and yoga has been kind of left by the wayside and almost completely excluded from this huge national.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although yoga's been promoted in other aspects in other ways, so I think it's a bit too early to see exactly what the long-term impacts will be, but it's definitely something to point out and watch, so thank you. Yeah.
Atman had a question.
Yeah, just thinking of your research in the context of our project, would it be fair to say that, and I think Jason was kind of pointing to this with his question, that this coupling of yoga and Ayurveda is in a way artificial, so this sort of modern coupling of yoga and Ayurveda isn't really substantiated by anything that happened in history, at least in the 20th century, or is that overstating the case?
I think it's overstating the case a bit, but it depends on how if you're viewing Ayurveda as a coherent system of medicine that makes constant reference to particular texts, there's not much in common. But if you're thinking about the variety and creativity of people addressing issues of health and happiness and suffering and longevity, then I think there's always a kind of continuity of vernacular practices and applications, and whoever's available you're going to ask. And there's definitely an association of yogis being able to help your health, at least certain ones, maybe not everyone. So they're both related and not related.
Last quick question.
As you discussed with AYUSH, and it is like collecting so many things under one umbrella. Ayurveda, yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy. And is it like open up for the allopathy as well?
I'm not sure if I understand
Yeah,
the question.
like in AYUSH,
Yeah.
you collected like Ayurveda, and then Unani Chikitsa, then Siddha, then homeopathy. So is this AyurYoga is open up for like embracing or like using allopathic substitute as well?
Well, a lot of the institutionalized training in all those disciplines now includes elements of allopathic training as well, and probably increasingly so if you're going to be a registered practitioner. But I don't think if you're getting an allopathic degree, you necessarily get any training in any of the AYUSH modalities. I think it's still very much a catch-all phrase, but an idea that you can, there's a public value in promoting all these different treatment modalities. I'm not sure if I quite got your question, but maybe we can talk after.
And it's creative, again, another question, like if you amalgamate all the aspects of health and regeneration, then how you can see that which is working and which is not working?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think people are overly concerned as long as one of them is working.
Thank you. Jeffrey.
Well, actually, I also had a question about AyurYog, which is how, I don't know the history here very well, but how far did the actual creation of AyurYog with its parallelism between the five modalities contribute to this sense of yoga and Ayurveda as being parallel things that were dealing with health, do you think? Or was that something that was already fairly well established at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they kind of came together, and I think this was happening in the 70s. I think the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and his global success, because he started promoting Ayurveda as a sister science to his science of meditation from the late 1970s. He starts really doing the publicity for that in the early 1980s, and I think it's kind of riding a wave together. The short answer, yeah.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. We are breaking here for coffee, half an hour break, and we'll come back at another